I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, I'm delighted to introduce you to a fabulous writer. His name is Robert Hauser, and he has written a riveting historical novel. It is called Blood Summer 1862. The work is a poignant exploration of a tumultuous period in American history, specifically the second year of the Civil War and its profound impact on both European immigrants and the indigenous Dakota Sioux tribe in Minnesota. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his wonderful book. The links are below this interview. Robert, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
I'd imagine you're a history buff if you're deciding to write a historical novel about the summer of 1862.
I am. I actually thought of majoring in history in college, but then switched to pre-med. And I went to medical school and practiced medicine for 47 years.
Wow. Okay, well, it's an interesting life for sure. I'll call you doctor instead of Robert.
No.
As a
No
writer,
worries.
I'll call you Robert then. Okay,
Okay.
sounds good. When you're in when we talk to you about a medical issue, we'll call you doctor. That sounds
All
great.
right.
So this is a great book. It talks about the hardships faced by a Swedish family. I know you live in Minnesota. Is this something you became familiar with as you were living in Minnesota and your research on the historical era?
Actually, it happened when I was in a bookstore, and I happened to pick up a thin paperback written by a current Minnesotan about his family, Swedish family who came here in the mid 1850s, and they set up their farms in mid Minnesota. And one day, when this massacre occurred, half of them lost their lives. And I just was taken by the tragedy, the very tragedy of these people who had worked hard to get here, obviously working hard to farm their land. And one morning they wake up and the warriors are at their door, and they killed half of them. So I got interested in the history, and I went all the way back to the beginning. And the beginning really is with Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, as you know, was responsible for the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and he had a vision for the country. He wanted to see white farmers from East Coast to West. And in order to do that, in addition to the Louisiana Purchase, he had to acquire all the Indian land that lay between the Mississippi and the Pacific Ocean.
So that purchase was basically a type of ethnic cleansing in a way to get white farmers in that area and to rid the land of Indians?
Well,
Or
he was
indigenous
concerned that the Native Americans were more allied with the British and the French. And so he instituted a series of trading networks so that the Native Americans began to trade with the United States traders rather than with foreign traders.
Abraham Lincoln is a central part of your book as well. He sought to
Yes.
a balance between justice and compassion for the Sioux prisoners. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Abraham Lincoln in 1862 was facing a disaster militarily. They had just abandoned the siege of Richmond. Robert E. Lee had defeated the Union Army around Richmond. The Union Army had retreated to the capital, Washington, D.C., and Robert E. Lee followed them up to the Second Battle of Bull Run and defeated the Union Army. And then they were 20 miles away from Washington. So at the time that this Dakota Sioux War broke out, Lincoln was under tremendous pressure from a military standpoint. He was trying to keep the army together. He was trying to defeat Lee at the doorsteps of the Capitol. So you have to appreciate the tremendous commitment Lincoln had to justice. He took time out of his incredible day to deal with this emergency in Minnesota.
Yeah. He was the right man for the right time because this was a perilous time in American history where
Absolutely.
the Union could have been ripped apart and other grave consequences could have resulted.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he depended very much on Minnesota to supply him with troops. So when the outbreak occurred, when the Dakota Sioux War occurred, the governor of Minnesota, Governor Ramsey, requested of Lincoln not to send him the troops that he was due. And Lincoln finally gave in and said, look, you need to deal with this emergency. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. In your novel, the Swedish family and the devout Dakota Sioux man form an unlikely bond. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to explore this relationship that deals with cultural understanding and empathy during these trying times.
In my research, it was clear that only a small minority of Dakota Sioux actually participated in the war. There was a large Christian group of Dakota Sioux who aided the settlers, protected them, hid them from the warring Dakota Sioux. So I created this character by the name of Chaska. And Chaska, by the way, is the name for the firstborn son.
Mm.
Chaska became a devout Christian and knowledgeable in the battle, and in the Bible. And when he saw what was happening, he decided to come to the rescue of this Swedish family and to many others. So, for example, when two of the Swedish family were taken captive, he saw to it that they were protected. He also helped them escape back to their homes.
Yeah. Why was there a Dakota Sioux uprising? What were the reasons, the motivations?
For a long time, the Dakota Sioux had progressively lost their land. Despite the treaties that they had signed in the early 19th century, the U.S. government continued to come after their land. And they would sign one treaty after another. And usually the last treaty was the one that took their land away.
Mm.
So, for example, in 1851, a treaty was signed that gave the Dakota Sioux 150 miles on either side of the Minnesota River as their reservation. Mm. Then in 1858, the government came at them and said, look, we want the land on the north side of the Minnesota River, which happened to be the most fertile land and the land with the most game. Well, the chiefs, the leaders of the Dakota Sioux, gave in and signed a treaty so that suddenly the Dakota Sioux were confined to the south side of the river. There wasn't enough land to grow food. There was not enough game to supply their needs. And so they began to starve. Mm. And to make matters worse, the government was always late with the annuity that they owed the Dakota Sioux for signing these treaties. In 1862, the annuity was particularly late because of the Civil War. And what was happening, the Dakota Sioux had no food. They were starving to death. I'm amazed that an outbreak did not occur sooner than it actually did. But on August 17th of 1962, there were 4 young men walking through a farmer's pasture, and they saw 5 whites, and they killed them. So that triggered the outbreak. But the outbreak occurred because they were starving. They were desperate people.
Yeah, it was a perfect storm. The people had been robbed
storm.
of their land, cheated, lied to, starved. At one point, anybody's going to break and either going to make a stand or run away, and they chose to make a stand. The title is very compelling, Blood Summer, 1862. Is that historically what this is referred to, or is that a convention or an invention of your own?
It's an invention of my own.
Tell us a little bit about why you chose to call it Blood Summer
Well, it
1862.
was an extraordinarily bloody summer in the Civil War.
Mm,
The Battle of Antietam, which was the bloodiest battle of the war, just terrible. 10,000 men died within the first hour, and then you have this slaughter, of course, in Minnesota. So it was indeed a bloody summer.
Tell me about your research on this book. Did it take you a long time to gather the information? And why did you decide to do it in novel form, historical novel form, rather than a nonfiction format?
Uh, I spent about 3 years in my research,
Mhm.
and it was primarily through papers published in historical journals, books that were written. And I decided to do it in this form because I had read so many books that just laid out the facts, and you lost some of the emotion
Mhm.
in the process. And you read a history, and it's one thing after another. I wanted to inject love, hate, passion into this book.
Exactly. As we say in TV news, if you tell 1,000 people's stories, it's statistics. If you tell one person's story, it's compelling.
Yes,
And that's what you've
yes,
done in this. You've focused it on a couple of central characters and brought the rest of it to life through their reactions, through their emotions, through their hardships. And it's very, very effective. The name of the book is Blood Summer 1862. It's a work, an exploration of a tumultuous period in American history, the second year of the Civil War, and its profound impact on European immigrants and the indigenous Dakota Sioux tribe in Minnesota. Robert, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
you're welcome. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it as well. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.